one of the most hotly debated subjects in the entire 2020 NEC code change process was the definition of reconditioned. So in the 2017 NEC, they added an informational note in 110.3a, and it was a nice, simple little thing. It just said, hey, equipment doesn't have to be new. It can be refurbished, reconditioned, remanufactured. It was just an informational note. And boy, you want to talk about opening Pandora's box. That ended up becoming a nightmare because it's an informational note, which means it's not enforceable necessarily. 90.5C says that. But it also isn't something that you definitely that you want to just cross out of your book either. I mean, it's there for a reason. So when it says equipment can be reconditioned, does that mean that you can use reconditioned equipment? Or does that give you the permission to perform reconditioning on equipment? Equipment can be reconditioned. So the problem with that is there are certain types of equipment that are not designed to be reconditioned. And really where a lot of this started was with circuit breakers back in Hurricane Katrina, back in, 2006 or so? So Hurricane Katrina hits, it was 2008. Hurricane Katrina happens, and New Orleans is underwater for, several weeks, and by the time they get the levees built back up and the floodwaters dealt with, there's all these homes that were submerged underwater for weeks at a time, and they had to be rewired. So electricians from all over the country come flying into New Orleans, and they rip all the wiring out of the houses, and they recycle it, get some money out of it. No problem there, do it. No reason to throw it away, certainly. But then they were taking out the panel boards and the circuit breakers, and what were they doing with the circuit breakers? Well, they were smart enough they weren't reusing them, right? I mean, it was under salt water for a month. But unfortunately, they also weren't throwing them away. They were selling them online, like on companies like eBay. So they were selling them as reconditioned circuit breakers. And the people that are kind of the big players in the industry, Square D and Eaton and Siemens, they start looking at this and they're like, listen, you're not our competition. You sell 100 breakers, we sell 100 million. We're not worried about you selling breakers. But when you say that they're reconditioned, how exactly did you recondition a molded case circuit breaker? I mean, you can't open them. They're riveted shut. And they're riveted shut for a reason, because they don't want people opening them, right? If people could open them, they would. They'd be trying to change trip points and everything else and then putting them back together, and they wouldn't even work. So they're selling them as reconditioned, and the manufacturer is saying, well, how do you recondition a molded case circuit breaker? It's not even possible. Even if you could open it up, there's no user replaceable parts in there. You can't go to the store and buy a new spring. You can't recondition this stuff. So how are you reconditioning them? And the guys on eBay are like, well, we sprayed them with a hose. That's reconditioning, right? No, that's not reconditioning. So we needed to create a definition for reconditioned because of that informational note we added back in 2017. So what does reconditioned or reconditioning mean? Now, in the photograph here, this is a person that is actually performing reconditioning on a transformer. This is a real picture of the reconditioning process. So you can see right off the bat, without even reading the definition, it is not spraying something with a hose and calling it good. It's a lot more involved than that. So reconditioning, or reconditioned, is electromechanical systems, apparatus, equipment, or components. So electrical stuff, right? Electrical stuff that's restored to operating conditions. Okay, so that alone tells me that if it wasn't broken, then you can't recondition it because it's restored to operating conditions. So it wasn't in an operating condition when you reconditioned it, right? So it's restored to operating conditions. So at a minimum, you're ripping it apart and getting it to the point where it was no longer working. So it was either not working and therefore you're reconditioning it, or you are rendering it inoperable by ripping it apart and making it not in operating condition, and then you're restoring it to operating condition. So the transformer here that they're reconditioning, it might have been in operating condition, but it was old and undependable or maybe slightly damaged, so they're reconditioning it. Now, reconditioning does not include on-site servicing or replacing listed equipment on a one-to-one basis. All right, so you can't recondition little molded case circuit breakers. You throw those in the garbage if they stop working. Well, this is a medium voltage vacuum type power circuit breaker. These you do not throw in the garbage if they stop working, right? These you're going to try to fix. So this is at a place where I teach every year, and once a year there's a company that comes in from a neighboring state and they test all of these circuit breakers, and they do whatever kind of maintenance is required on them. They recalibrate them if necessary, and as part of the on-site maintenance, if they test it and they find that it's not working properly and they can't adjust it or fix it on site, they will send it back to their facility where it will get reconditioned. Reconditioning is usually not something that's going to happen on site. You're not going to rip it apart and replace. I mean, you could, but it's generally not something that happens on site. It's not on-site maintenance and repair. It's more involved than that. It also does not include replacing listed equipment on a one-to-one basis. So if you've got if you have something that's listed, maybe a luminaire, right? There's an easy one. If you've got a luminaire and you're replacing one little component of it, does that mean that you reconditioned it? No, that's just replacing a little part of the equipment. It's when you're ripping it apart and rebuilding it, that's when we call it reconditioned. And in fact, there's an informational note that kind of clarifies that as well. It says, look, the terms rebuilt, refurbished, or remanufactured are synonymous with reconditioned. So it's not just cleaned up, it's rebuilt, right, or remanufactured. Here in the photograph, these transformers very well could be reconditioned transformers. Now I took this picture. I don't know if they were reconditioned. They could have been. I put my little sticker on here that says, hey, these are refurbished by RJET out of Salt Lake City, Utah, and they did it on February 6th of 1999, and that's to satisfy a requirement that they added in 110.22 that says for reconditioned equipment, you got to have a label on it saying who reconditioned it and what date it happened. The other thing that happened in the 2020 code having to do with reconditioned is, especially in Chapter 4, because Chapter 4 is equipment, right? So especially in Chapter 4, we added language to almost every article indicating whether the product may or may not be reconditioned. If you have receptacles, for example, you can't recondition a receptacle. If the receptacle breaks or becomes inoperable, you throw it away, buy a new one, right? Transformers can certainly be reconditioned. If you go into chapters 5, 6, and 7, there's also some similar requirements there. You go to chapter 7 for emergency systems. It's going to say, listen, you can't recondition a transfer switch. It's not something that's allowed to be reconditioned. Perhaps the most popular article, though, that deals with reconditioning is Article 240, which deals with overcurrent protection. Obviously, you can't recondition a fuse. You know what I mean? The fuse blows, you throw it away, you buy a new fuse. But can you remanufacture circuit breakers? Well, as we mentioned, you're not allowed to remanufacture molded case circuit breakers, but you can recondition medium voltage and high voltage circuit breakers. You're not allowed to recondition the electronic trip units inside of a power circuit breaker or an insulated case circuit breaker, but you're allowed to recondition the breaker itself. So there are certain things that can and cannot be reconditioned. Because of all of those rules, we had to have a definition, which we added in the 2020 code. Be sure to like, follow, subscribe, and ring the bell.